A warning by armed guards officer, the royal king's horse guards. The first light of dawn stretched across the kingdom, painting the royal stables in soft shades of gold and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay, polished leather, and dew-covered grass. Inside the stables, the royal horses stirred quietly, shifting their hooves against the wooden floorboards. Their coats gleamed in the morning light, black as midnight, chestnut as autumn leaves, and pure white that shimmered like snow. Each horse belonged to the king, and each had been trained to serve in ceremonial processions or battle. They were the pride of the kingdom, symbols of power, loyalty, and elegance. Among the men tending to the stables was Officer Darien. He was tall and strong, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. Every morning before the sun fully rose, Darien walked through the stables, checking each horse, examining every bridle, saddle, and hoof. To an ordinary person, this might have seemed routine. But Darien knew that even the smallest sign of neglect could turn into disaster in the kingdom. Every detail mattered. A loose strap, a frightened horse, or a missing guard could mean danger not just for the king, but for everyone in the royal court. The other guards were busy as well. Some brushed the horses' shiny coats until they reflected the sunlight, while others led them to the training grounds for morning exercises. The rhythmic sound of hooves hitting the soft earth echoed across the yard as the horses trotted and cantered in perfect formation. Darien watched them with a careful eye. He could tell a horse's mood just by the flick of an ear or the way it held its tail. Horses, he knew, were more than animals. They were partners, allies, and sometimes the only thing standing between the king and danger. As Darien walked along the edge of the stables, he noticed something unusual. A small group of men were gathered near the outer gate, just beyond the stables. They were too far to hear clearly, and their faces were hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats and scarves, but their movement caught his attention. They weren't like the regular traders or travelers who sometimes came to deliver supplies. These men moved cautiously, looking over their shoulders as if afraid of being seen. Their horses were not the noble, well-trained steeds of the royal stables, but common workhorses, rough and sturdy. Darien's instincts immediately alerted him. He had served as an officer in the royal guard for many years, and he had learned to trust the small signs that something was wrong. The way the men whispered to each other, the nervous glances, the hesitation in their steps, all of it told him that this was no ordinary morning visitor. The king's kingdom had been at peace for decades, but Darien knew that peace could be fragile. Trouble often arrived quietly, like a shadow moving across the land before anyone noticed. He walked closer, keeping to the shadows, careful not to reveal his presence. The men seemed unaware of him. Darien crouched behind a wooden fence and watched. One of the men unrolled a rough map on the ground, pointing to lines and symbols that Darien did not immediately recognize. Another man tightened the straps of his horse's saddle, adjusting something that looked like a small bag or pouch. It was clear they had a plan, though what that plan was, Darien could not tell yet. After a few tense minutes, Darien returned to the stables. He did not want to confront the men directly, not yet. He needed more information, and he needed to prepare his guards in case the situation escalated. He went to the main training area, where the other horse guards were practicing drills. Their movements were precise, almost like a dance, shields raised, swords swinging, hooves pounding in perfect rhythm. Darien joined them for a few exercises, not to train but to observe. A good officer always knew the strengths and weaknesses of his team. "Keep your eyes open," he said quietly to his fellow guards as they rested for a moment. "We may have visitors we weren't expecting." Most of the guards laughed, thinking he was joking. The kingdom had been peaceful for so long that the idea of an attack seemed absurd. But Darien did not smile. He knew better. Experience had taught him that danger often arrived when least expected, and when it did, it came swiftly and without warning. After the training, Darien returned to the edge of the stables to observe the gate once more. The men were still there, though now they seemed more focused on the surrounding area, scanning the horizon and the trees beyond. One of them dismounted and moved quietly through the shadows, inspecting the fences and the paths leading into the royal grounds. Darien's heart quickened. This was no casual visit, this was reconnaissance. They were testing the boundaries, looking for weaknesses. Darien took a deep breath and made a decision. He would report this to the captain of the horse guards immediately. But first, he needed to gather proof. He moved quietly along the stables, keeping low and using the shadows as cover. His boots made no sound on the soft ground, and he could smell the horses' warm breath as he passed by. He found a small tree just beyond the fence, climbed it silently, and watched the men through the branches. From this vantage point, he could see them more clearly. They were armed, not heavily, but enough to cause trouble if given the chance. Daggers, short swords, and small crossbows were tucked into their belts and saddlebags. Darien's mind raced. Why were they here? Was this the start of a larger plot, or were they mere thieves? Either way, the safety of the king's horses was at stake. He had to act carefully. One wrong move could alert the men and put the royal stables in danger. After observing for nearly an hour, Darien climbed down and returned to the stables. He found the captain, an older, respected officer named Sir Roland, reviewing the guards' training schedules. Darien explained what he had seen, describing the men, their movements, and the way they had examined the fences. Sir Roland listened carefully, stroking his gray beard. "Darien, you may be seeing shadows where there are none," Sir Roland said thoughtfully. "The kingdom has been safe for so long." "I am certain, sir," Darien replied firmly. "These men are not ordinary travelers. They are watching, planning. If we do nothing, we could be unprepared for what they intend." Sir Roland nodded slowly. "Very well, prepare your men. We will increase patrols around the stables and the gates. Keep your observations discreet. If anything happens, we must be ready to respond immediately." Darien felt a mixture of relief and tension. Relief that Sir Roland had trusted his judgment, and tension because the threat was real and close. He returned to his duties, brushing the horses and checking the equipment, but his mind remained alert, watching the gates and listening to every sound. Even the slightest rustle of leaves or clatter of hooves could signal danger. By mid-morning, the courtyard was bustling. Servants carried feed and water for the horses. Blacksmiths checked the armor and saddles, and young recruits practiced riding under the watchful eyes of the experienced guards. Darien moved among them, offering instructions and keeping his eyes on the horizon. Every now and then he would glance at the gate, half expecting to see the strangers slip through the shadows. The horses seemed to sense his vigilance. Their ears twitched, nostrils flared, and muscles tensed as they pranced around the yard. Darien whispered to them, calming their nerves. "All will be well," he said softly. "Stay ready, and we will protect you." As the sun climbed higher, Darien felt a chill despite the warmth of the day. He knew that something significant was about to happen. Whether it would be a simple test of the guard's skills or the beginning of a serious threat, he could not yet tell. But he understood one thing clearly. The safety of the king's horses, and perhaps the kingdom itself, depended on the vigilance of those who served faithfully. The morning ended much like it had begun, with horses in their stalls and guards at their posts. But beneath the calm surface, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. Darien stood by the gate one last time before heading to report back to the captain. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The kingdom trusted him, and he would not fail. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with courage, skill, and unwavering attention to detail. The first warning had been noticed, but the story of what would come next had only just begun. Darien knew that this day, though it seemed ordinary, might be the day that tested not only his skill as an officer, but also the loyalty and bravery of the entire Royal Horse Guard. And so, with his eyes sharp and his mind alert, he prepared for whatever the dawn might bring. The day passed slowly for Officer Darien, though his mind was far from idle. Even as the sun climbed high in the sky, casting its warm light across the kingdom, his thoughts were fixed on the strangers he had observed the previous morning. He could not shake the feeling that their presence was not a mere coincidence. Something about the way they had moved, the way they had examined the fences, suggested careful planning. They were not ordinary travelers, and the calm of the kingdom suddenly felt fragile, like thin ice waiting to crack. Darien decided to take matters into his own hands. Though he had reported his observations to Sir Roland, he knew that waiting passively was not an option. The royal horse guards had to be prepared, and he had to learn more about these intruders before they could act. He gathered a small group of trusted guards, men who had served alongside him for years and who shared his sharp instincts. Their faces, serious and alert, mirrored his own determination. "Listen carefully," Darien said, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what these men want, but we do know they are watching us. We must follow them without being seen. If they intend harm, we need proof, and we need to stop them before they reach the stables or the king's horses." The guards nodded, adjusting their gear and mounting their horses. The royal steeds were trained for swift, silent movement, and the riders knew how to remain nearly invisible in the forested paths around the palace. Darien led them along narrow trails that wound through the trees, keeping to the shadows where the sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor. Each rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made the men tense, but they pressed forward silently, determined to uncover the truth. Hours passed as they trailed the strangers from a safe distance. The men moved cautiously, checking their surroundings as if afraid someone might be following them. Darien noticed that they avoided the main roads, sticking instead to hidden paths and overgrown trails. This was no ordinary travel, it was stealth, and it spoke of experience. Darien realized that these men had likely done this before. They knew how to move without drawing attention. By mid-afternoon, the strangers arrived at a small clearing near the edge of the forest. They dismounted, speaking in hushed tones, and began to unload supplies from their saddlebags. Darien and his men crouched behind the trees, observing quietly. The intruders spread out, examining a small map and marking points on it. One of them carefully inspected the fences around the clearing, looking for weak spots, while another ran his hand along the ground, as if checking the terrain. Darien's mind raced. He understood now that this was more than simple curiosity. The strangers were planning something, and their plan involved more than just a casual visit. The horses were at risk, and perhaps even the safety of the king himself. He knew that patience was key. Any rash action could alert the intruders and spoil the chance to gather crucial information. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the clearing, Darien made a decision. He would wait until nightfall, when the darkness would give them an advantage. The intruders would be less cautious, assuming that the cover of night would hide their movements. And it was then that Darien would act, to gather evidence, to track their movements, and, if necessary, to intervene. The guards retreated to a hidden spot in the forest, where they could rest without being seen. They ate quietly, keeping their voices low, and checked their weapons and saddles. Darien did the same, his mind already running through every possible scenario. He considered the strengths and weaknesses of the strangers, the terrain around the clearing, and the best way to protect the royal horses. Night fell, and the forest transformed. Shadows deepened, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures filled the air. The strangers continued their work, now less cautious than before. They moved with purpose, setting up small markers and whispering to each other in a language Darien did not recognize. It was clear that they were preparing for something significant, and time was running short. Darien signaled to his men, and they moved silently through the trees, closing the distance to the clearing without being detected. Each step was careful, calculated, as they navigated roots and uneven ground. When they were close enough, Darien studied the strangers again. He recognized a pattern in their movements, a rhythm that suggested coordination and experience. These were not amateurs, they were skilled, and their intentions were serious. Suddenly, one of the intruders paused, looking toward the forest. Darien froze, holding his breath. The man's gaze swept over the trees, and for a tense moment it seemed as though they might have been discovered. But the man relaxed, shrugging and turning back to his task. Darien exhaled slowly, signaling to his guards to remain still. Their hearts pounded, but they remained quiet, understanding the importance of patience. Hours passed, and the intruders finally began to leave the clearing. Darien and his men followed, careful to keep their distance. The strangers moved toward a hidden path that led further into the kingdom, away from the main roads and the watchful eyes of the castle guards. Darien's mind raced with questions. Where were they going? What were they planning? And most importantly, how could they be stopped before they reached the royal stables? By the time the strangers disappeared from view, Darien had formed a plan. He would return to the castle immediately and report everything to Sir Roland. They would strengthen the defenses around the stables, increase patrols along the forest paths, and remain ready for any sudden attack. But he also knew that observation alone would not be enough. The intruders had to be tracked, their movements understood, and their intentions revealed before they could act. The ride back to the castle was tense but swift. The guards moved through the forest with practiced skill, keeping to the shadows and avoiding open ground. Every sound, every movement in the trees was noted. Darien's mind never rested. He reviewed the day's observations in detail, the intruders' mannerisms, the supplies they carried, and the way they had examined the fences. Every detail could prove crucial in the days to come. When they finally reached the castle, the night was deep, and the stars shone brightly above the towers and walls. The guards dismounted quietly and led their horses to the stables, careful to make no noise. Darien went straight to Sir Roland, explaining everything in full detail. He described the men, their movements, the map, and the small markers they had left behind. He spoke of the hidden paths, the clearing, and the sense of urgency that had guided his actions all day. Sir Roland listened intently, his face serious. "You have done well, Darien," he said when Darien finished. "Your observations are precise and thorough. This is more than a warning, it is intelligence. We must act carefully but decisively. The safety of the royal stables and the king's horses is paramount." Darien felt a measure of relief, but also a renewed sense of responsibility. The strangers had been seen, but they had not been stopped. The danger remained, and the kingdom's defenses had to be strengthened immediately. He returned to the stables, organizing patrols and ensuring that every horse was checked, every fence secured, and every guard alert. The royal horses were restless, sensing the tension in the air. Darien whispered to them, calming their nerves as best he could. The night passed slowly. Darien and his men took turns on watch, moving silently through the stables and the surrounding grounds. Every sound was scrutinized, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the faint echo of hooves on the road. Nothing escaped their attention. By the time dawn approached, Darien was exhausted but resolute. The kingdom was safe for the moment, but he knew that the intruders' intentions would reveal themselves soon. As the first light of morning touched the castle towers, Darien stood at the edge of the stables, looking toward the forest where the strangers had appeared. He felt a mixture of pride and determination. Pride in the skill and loyalty of his guards, determination to protect the king's horses and the kingdom at all costs. The warning he had received through his instincts the day before had proven true. Danger could come without notice, and the only way to face it was with vigilance, courage, and careful planning. The day ahead promised more challenges. Darien knew that the intruders were still in the kingdom, moving quietly, watching and planning. But he also knew that with careful observation, swift action, and loyal guards, the threat could be managed. He would remain alert, ready to act at the first sign of trouble. The safety of the kingdom, the royal stables, and the king's prized horses depended on it. And so, with the morning sun rising behind him, Officer Darien prepared for the next chapter of the unfolding events. The strangers had been seen, their intentions suspected, and the kingdom's defenders were ready. Yet a sense of unease lingered in the air, a quiet warning that the true test of courage and vigilance was only just beginning. The morning air was crisp and fresh as Officer Darien stood at the edge of the royal stables, watching the sun slowly rise over the kingdom. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on his mind. The strangers he had observed in the forest were still unaccounted for, and their intentions remained unknown. Every instinct he possessed told him that the danger was real and that the kingdom could not afford to wait any longer. Darien called a meeting of the horse guards. The men gathered quickly, their faces alert and serious. They trusted him, not just because of his skill as an officer, but because he had always led them with fairness, courage, and sharp judgment. Today, that trust would be tested, as the guards would need to act with both caution and determination. "We have observed intruders near the forest edge," Darien began, his voice calm but firm. "They are armed and moving in secret. Their intentions are unclear, but we cannot ignore the threat. We will increase patrols, monitor the paths, and be ready to act if they attempt to approach the royal stables or the king's horses. Every guard must remain vigilant." The guards nodded, absorbing his instructions. Darien then outlined a plan. Some men would ride in pairs along the hidden paths, observing from a distance. Others would remain near the stables, ensuring the safety of the horses. Darien himself would take a small team to scout the forest, keeping track of the intruders while remaining hidden. He emphasized the importance of stealth, patience, and careful observation. Any rash move could alert the strangers and compromise the kingdom's security. Once the plan was set, Darien and his team mounted their horses. The royal steeds, trained for speed and silence, responded immediately to their riders' commands. The team moved along narrow trails, sticking to the shadows and using the trees for cover. Each step, each movement was deliberate. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the call of birds, the distant roar of a river, but Darien's attention remained focused on the intruders. Hours passed as they followed the hidden paths. The strangers were cautious but determined, moving with purpose toward a remote part of the kingdom. Darien observed every detail, the way they handled their weapons, the signals they used to communicate, the care they took to avoid leaving traces behind. It was clear that these men were trained and experienced, not ordinary thieves or travelers. They had a plan, and they were executing it with precision. By mid-afternoon, the intruders reached a small, abandoned watchtower on a hill. They dismounted and began unloading supplies from their horses. Darien's heart quickened. This was their base of operations, at least temporarily. The watchtower was old and crumbling, but it offered a clear view of the surrounding forest and paths. From here, the intruders could observe the kingdom without being seen. Darien and his men crouched behind a ridge, watching carefully. One of the intruders began sharpening a dagger, while another checked the map they had carried the day before. A third man paced back and forth, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. Darien's mind raced as he tried to anticipate their next step. If they intended to approach the stables, they would likely move under cover of darkness. He would need to be ready to intercept them. As the sun began to set, the forest took on a different character. Shadows grew long and deep, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures filled the air. Darien knew that night would provide both advantages and dangers. The darkness could hide their movements, but it could also hide the intruder's approach. He instructed his men to stay alert, to use every sense to detect the smallest sign of danger. Night fell, and the forest became a world of shadows. Darien and his team moved carefully, using the cover of darkness to approach the watchtower. They stayed low, listening for the faintest sounds, the snap of a twig, the whisper of clothing against branches, the quiet shuffle of boots on dirt. The intruders were still at the tower, unaware of the guards watching them from the forest. Suddenly, a faint light flickered from the top of the watchtower. Darien signaled to his men to remain still. The intruders were using a small lantern, likely to read their map or check their supplies. Darien took note of their positions, memorizing the layout and the placement of their weapons. He knew that this information could be crucial if a confrontation became necessary. Hours passed slowly. The intruders eventually prepared to move again, packing up their supplies and mounting their horses. Darien's heart pounded. This was the moment they had been waiting for. If the strangers moved toward the kingdom or the stables, Darien and his men would need to act swiftly to intercept them. He signaled to his team, and they followed the intruders at a safe distance, moving quietly through the shadows. The intruders avoided the main roads, sticking to narrow paths and dense foliage. They were careful, but not cautious enough to avoid Darien's experienced eyes. He noted every twist and turn, every small signal between them, and planned how to use this knowledge to protect the kingdom. The stakes were high. One wrong move could result in the intruders reaching the stables or alerting the royal guards prematurely. By midnight, the strangers approached a narrow valley that led toward the outer edges of the kingdom. Darien decided it was time to act. He and his team positioned themselves strategically, using the terrain for cover. The guards were ready, weapons in hand, prepared to stop the intruders without putting the royal horses at risk. Darien's mind was focused, calculating every possibility, every movement, every potential outcome. The intruders entered the valley, unaware of the ambush awaiting them. Darien signaled to his men, and they moved silently, surrounding the strangers from multiple directions. The horses' hooves made almost no sound on the soft ground, and the guards' movements were precise and coordinated. The strangers were trained, but they had not expected such vigilance. A tense moment passed, with both sides frozen, waiting for the other to act. Darien's eyes met those of the intruder leading the group. He could see the surprise and uncertainty in the man's expression. This pause, though brief, was critical. Darien used it to issue a firm command to the intruders, demanding that they stop and identify themselves. The forest was silent except for the distant call of an owl, the tension so thick it could almost be felt in the air. The strangers hesitated. For a moment, it seemed they might flee or resist. But Darien's calm authority, combined with the readiness of his guards, convinced them to comply. They dismounted slowly, hands visible, and spoke in cautious tones. Darien listened carefully, noting their words, their accents, and their intentions. Though they were skilled and trained, they had not expected the level of preparedness they now faced. Darien's team remained vigilant, circling the strangers to prevent any sudden move. The officer assessed the situation quickly. He knew that the intruders were not acting recklessly. They had a plan, but they were not yet ready to carry it out. By gaining control of this encounter, Darien could extract information, protect the kingdom, and prevent any harm to the royal stables or horses. After careful questioning, the intruders revealed that they were scouts sent by a neighboring region, testing the defenses of the kingdom. They meant no immediate harm but had been instructed to observe weaknesses and report back. Darien listened intently, understanding that even though no attack had occurred, the threat remained real. Knowledge of their intentions allowed him to prepare more effectively for the days ahead. With the intruders identified and their movements documented, Darien released them under strict conditions. They were sent back along the path they had come, warned that any attempt to return would be met with force. Darienne's team remained on high alert, ensuring that the intruders left the area safely but under the firm control of the kingdom's guards. By the time the night ended, Darienne and his men returned to the royal stables. The first light of dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The royal horses were calm, the stables secure, and the kingdom safe for now. Darienne knew that vigilance was the key to security, and he resolved to maintain this level of preparedness at all times. The events of the night had tested the skills, courage, and judgment of the royal horse guards. Darienne had led them with wisdom, ensuring that the kingdom remained protected. Though the threat had been neutralized, he knew that this was only the beginning. Challenges would come again, and the safety of the king and his prized horses depended on the unwavering dedication of officers like him. As the sun rose higher, Darienne stood at the edge of the stables, watching the kingdom awaken. He felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. Pride in his guards and their loyalty, responsibility for the security of the royal horses and the kingdom. He understood that the world beyond the castle walls could be dangerous, but with careful observation, swift action, and courage, they could face any challenge that arose. And so, with the dawn of a new day, Officer Darienne prepared for the next stage of his duty. The strangers had been encountered, their intentions partially revealed, and the kingdom had been safeguarded. Yet he knew that the true test of vigilance, strategy, and courage was only beginning. The kingdom was quiet as dawn broke, but Officer Darienne could feel tension in the air. Though the intruders had been confronted and sent away the night before, Darienne knew the threat was far from over. Experienced as he was, he understood that scouts often returned to report their findings, and their leaders would likely plan another attempt, this time more carefully, more strategically. The safety of the royal horses, the stables, and perhaps even the king himself depended on remaining alert and ready. Darienne moved through the stables, checking on each horse. The royal steeds shifted nervously under his touch, sensing the officer's concern. Their ears twitched at every sound, their eyes alert, their muscles coiled for sudden movement. "Calm," Darienne whispered softly, stroking their shiny coats. "We are ready. Nothing will happen while we are here." The horses seemed to respond, lowering their heads slightly, trusting the officer who had always been vigilant in protecting them. After ensuring the stables were secure, Darienne gathered the horse guards. "The intruders may return," he said, looking each man in the eye. "They learned our routines, they saw our positions. We must act quickly, decisively, and wisely if they try again. Tonight, we patrol the kingdom more closely, and we remain in constant communication. Every path, every hidden trail must be watched. No one goes unobserved." The guards nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had trained for emergencies, for threats to the kingdom, and for moments that required both courage and intelligence. But even the most skilled among them felt a shiver of tension at the thought of intruders approaching again, armed and determined. Darienne's presence, calm and resolute, steadied their nerves. As night fell, the patrols took their positions. Pairs of guards rode along the hidden paths, silent and vigilant, their eyes scanning the shadows. Darienne led a small group near the outer edges of the forest, moving with the careful precision that had saved them before. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound of hooves or footsteps drew their attention. The forest, normally serene and peaceful, now felt alive with tension and possibility. Hours passed slowly. The night was dark, pierced only by the soft glow of the moon. Darienne's team moved with quiet efficiency, communicating with small hand signals, alert for any sign of the intruders. And then, in the distance, a faint glimmer of light appeared between the trees. Darienne signaled to his men, and they slowed, their hearts beating faster. The strangers had returned. This time there were more of them, trained men, moving carefully but with clear purpose. They carried supplies, weapons, and equipment designed for stealth and speed. Darien observed closely, noting their movements, their spacing, and their apparent plan. Unlike before, they did not stop to set up a temporary base. They were moving toward the kingdom, toward the stables. This was no longer reconnaissance. They were attempting an approach, testing defenses under the cover of darkness. Darien signaled to his men to take positions along the path the intruders would follow. Each guard was stationed strategically, hidden among trees, behind rocks, or along ridges. Their horses, trained for stealth, stood quietly, ready to move at Darien's command. The officer's mind raced, calculating the best way to intercept the intruders without risking the safety of the horses or the guards themselves. Every moment counted. As the intruders drew closer, Darien could hear the faint sound of their footsteps on the soft forest floor. They were cautious, but not cautious enough to avoid the keen eyes of the royal horse guards. Darien signaled silently, and his team shifted into position, forming a subtle but effective barrier along the path. The intruders entered the area, unaware of the prepared guards. A tense moment passed. The forest was silent except for the distant cry of an owl and the gentle rustling of leaves. Then Darien spoke firmly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. "Stop. Identify yourselves." The intruders froze, surprised by the authority and confidence in his command. Their eyes darted around, realizing that the kingdom's guards were not only ready but fully prepared. One of the intruders, stepping forward cautiously, spoke in a calm but firm tone. "We mean no harm," he said. "We are here to observe and report. We do not wish to fight." Darien's eyes studied the man, noting the truthfulness or possible deception in his words. He knew better than to take anything at face value. Every action could be part of a larger plan, and patience was still essential. "Your intentions will be tested," Darien replied, his voice steady. "You will leave this area immediately, or you will face the consequences of trespassing in the kingdom's lands. We will not allow harm to come to the royal stables or the king's horses." The intruders hesitated, then, after a tense pause, retreated slowly along the path they had come, keeping their distance and avoiding direct confrontation. Darien's team remained vigilant, watching until the intruders disappeared from sight. He signaled to his men to maintain their positions, knowing that a sudden attack could come at any moment. The forest was quiet once again, but the tension lingered. The intruders had returned with more preparation, demonstrating that the threat was real and persistent. The kingdom's safety depended on continued vigilance and careful planning. After the night passed without further incident, Darien returned to the royal stables. He checked each horse personally, ensuring they were unharmed and calm. The guards followed his lead, inspecting the stables, checking locks, gates, and equipment. The royal horses, though nervous, seemed to trust the officer's presence. Darien spoke softly to each one, offering reassurance and calm. "All is well," he said. "You are safe. We are ready." The next morning, Darien called a council with Sir Roland and the senior guards. He recounted the events of the night, describing the intruders, numbers, movements, and apparent intentions. He emphasized the importance of continued observation, patrols, and preparation. Sir Roland listened carefully, nodding in agreement. "Your leadership has kept the kingdom safe," Sir Roland said. "But you are right, this is only the beginning. The intruders are clever and determined. We must remain vigilant and anticipate their next move. Darien, you will continue to lead the patrols and coordinate our defenses. The safety of the king's horses and the kingdom depends on you." Darien accepted the responsibility with humility and resolve. He knew that courage alone was not enough. Intelligence, observation, and planning were equally essential. The kingdom's defenses had been tested, and though the intruders had not yet caused harm, they had demonstrated persistence and skill. Every guard under Darienne's command needed to remain alert, every horse needed protection, and every path into the kingdom needed monitoring. The following days were filled with careful preparation. Patrols were increased, hidden paths were monitored continuously, and the guards practiced rapid response drills to ensure they could act quickly if necessary. Darien spent long hours observing the surrounding forests, noting changes in movement, listening for unusual sounds, and studying the terrain. His vigilance inspired the guards, and a sense of unity and purpose grew among them. Despite the intensity of the situation, Darien made sure the guards rested when possible. A tired guard could make mistakes, and mistakes could be costly. He rotated shifts, ensured that horses were fed and groomed, and kept morale high. The royal stables remained orderly and secure, a symbol of strength and preparedness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Darien stood on a ridge overlooking the forest. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the gentle wind carried the scent of pine and earth. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also a quiet confidence. The kingdom had faced threats before, and with courage, skill, and vigilance, it would survive again. Darien's thoughts turned to the intruders. They had tested the kingdom's defenses, and now it was time for the royal guards to demonstrate their strength and readiness. The coming days would likely bring more challenges, but Darien was prepared. He had seen the intruders, learned their patterns, and strengthened the kingdom's defenses. The royal horses were safe, the stables secure, and the guards united under his leadership. As night fell, the kingdom remained calm but alert. Darien and his team took their positions, eyes scanning the forest, ears listening for the faintest sound. The intruders might return at any moment, and when they did, the royal horse guards would be ready. The tension in the air was palpable, but so was the determination to protect the kingdom and its prized horses. Darien knew that the confrontation he had prepared for was approaching. The intruders had tested the kingdom, but now the kingdom would respond. The officers' vigilance, the guards' skill, and the readiness of the royal horses would determine the outcome. The kingdom's safety, its honor, and its future rested on their shoulders. And so, with the night fully upon them and the stars shining above, Officer Darien and the royal horse guards waited, ready to face whatever challenge the intruders would bring next. The true test of courage, strategy, and loyalty was at hand, and the kingdom's defenders were prepared to meet it with unwavering determination. The night was heavy and still, the forest cloaked in darkness that seemed almost alive. Officer Darien stood at the edge of the royal stables, his sharp eyes scanning the tree line, alert for any movement. The events of the past days had prepared him and his guards for this very moment. The intruders had returned, and this time there would be no chance for them to retreat unnoticed. The safety of the royal horses, the stables, and the kingdom itself depended on the courage, skill, and strategy of the horse guards. Darien's mind was focused, every nerve alert. He had studied the intruders' movements, anticipated their paths, and placed his men in positions that would allow them to act with both surprise and precision. Each guard had been assigned a station, some along the forest paths, others near hidden vantage points, and a few close to the stables to guard the horses directly. The royal steeds, calm yet attentive, stood ready to respond at the slightest signal. As the clock approached midnight, Darien's scouts reported faint signs of movement, shadows slipping between the trees, the subtle sound of hooves on soft earth. The intruders had returned, moving cautiously but with determination. Darien signaled to his men to hold their positions. Silence fell over the forest except for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of an owl. The intruders moved as expected, unaware that they were now being observed by a network of vigilant eyes. Darien watched them carefully, noting their numbers, their spacing, and the way they handled their weapons. They were more confident than before, but Darien knew better than to underestimate them. Experience had taught him that overconfidence often led to mistakes, and he intended to use that to his advantage. As the intruders approached a narrow path leading to the stables, Darien gave the signal. His team moved swiftly and silently, surrounding the intruders from multiple angles. The royal horses shifted beneath their riders, ready to respond at the officer's command. The intruders, caught by surprise, froze in their tracks. The forest, once quiet, now held a tension so thick it could almost be touched. "Stop! Identify yourselves," Darien commanded, his voice firm and authoritative. The intruders hesitated, realizing for the first time that they were outmatched by the kingdom's vigilance. Their eyes darted around, calculating the odds, weighing the risks of resistance against the certainty of capture. Darien's presence exuded calm confidence, a signal that the kingdom's defenders were prepared for any action. One of the intruders stepped forward cautiously. "We are here to gather information," he said, trying to maintain a tone of diplomacy. "We mean no harm if we are not provoked." Darien studied the man, reading his body language, listening carefully to his words. While the intruder spoke with a controlled voice, Darien could sense the tension beneath, the fear of being discovered and outmaneuvered. Darien motioned for his men to remain alert but not to advance. "Your intentions will be tested," he said. "If you attempt to enter the kingdom or approach the royal stables, you will face the consequences. Leave now and you will go unharmed. Stay and you will be captured." The intruders looked at each other, understanding that they had underestimated the kingdom's preparation. For a tense moment, silence filled the air. Then, slowly, the intruders began to retreat, carefully retracing their steps through the forest. Darien's scouts followed at a safe distance, ensuring that the intruders left the kingdom entirely. The royal horse guards remained alert, ready to respond if any unexpected move occurred. Every detail had been noted, every movement observed, and the intruders had learned that the kingdom's defenses were formidable. Once the intruders had vanished, Darien and his men returned to the stables. The royal horses were unharmed, calm, and alert. Darien moved among them, checking each one carefully, stroking their coats and whispering softly to ease their nerves. The horses, sensing his calm authority, relaxed slightly, trusting the officer who had consistently protected them. The next morning, Darien convened a council with Sir Roland and the senior guards. He reported the events of the night, detailing the intruders' numbers, movements, and intentions. He emphasized the importance of ongoing vigilance and preparation. Sir Roland listened attentively, nodding with approval. "You have led with skill and courage," Sir Roland said. "The kingdom owes its safety to your dedication. But remember, Darien, threats may return in other forms. The vigilance you have shown must continue. You have proven that foresight, planning, and courage are as valuable as any weapon." Darien accepted the praise with humility. He knew that leadership was not about glory, but about responsibility. The safety of the king's horses, the stables, and the kingdom rested on careful preparation, sharp observation, and the loyalty of the guards. The intruders had been thwarted, but the officer understood that security required constant effort. In the days that followed, the kingdom remained calm, yet the horse guards continued their patrols. Darien encouraged observation, discussion, and strategy among his team. Hidden paths were regularly checked, and communication signals were rehearsed. The royal stables, once simply a place of routine care, became a symbol of preparedness and vigilance. Every guard knew that their actions could prevent harm, protect the kingdom, and uphold the trust of the king. The royal horses, proud and noble, seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. They were calm, yet alert, as if aware that their protection was paramount. Darien moved among them each day, speaking to them softly, ensuring their comfort and maintaining their readiness. The officer understood that these animals were more than companions. They were partners in the kingdom's defense, trained for battle, ceremony, and service. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Darien stood at the stables, watching the kingdom from the edge of the forest. The wind carried the scents of pine, earth, and distant fields. He felt a mixture of pride, responsibility, and quiet satisfaction. The intruders had been repelled, the kingdom's defenses had held, and the horse guards had proven their loyalty and skill. But Darien also knew that peace was fragile. Vigilance could never be relaxed completely. He continued to organize patrols, rotate shifts, and inspect the stables daily. The guards remained alert, motivated by the officer's example, and by the knowledge that their actions directly protected the kingdom. Darien's leadership had inspired a sense of unity and purpose among the horse guards, and that unity was now stronger than ever. The king, informed of the events by Sir Roland, summoned Darien to the castle. In the great hall, the monarch praised the officer and his men for their vigilance and courage. "You have safeguarded not only my horses but the very honor and security of the kingdom," the king said. "Your foresight, skill, and leadership are remarkable. Know that your loyalty is valued and your dedication will be remembered." Darien bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, it was my duty and the duty of my guards. The kingdom is safe because every member of the royal horse guards did their part. We will remain vigilant for as long as it is needed." The king smiled, acknowledging the humility and dedication in Darien's words. As Darien returned to the stables, he reflected on the events that had unfolded. The strangers had tested the kingdom, and the horse guards had proven themselves capable and loyal. Yet the officer knew that vigilance must never cease. Every day, every guard, every horse had a role to play in the kingdom's security. The lessons learned during the intrusion had strengthened their resolve and sharpened their skills. In the weeks that followed, life in the kingdom returned to a calm routine. The royal horses were groomed, trained, and prepared for ceremonial duties and defense. The guards continued their patrols, now with greater confidence and experience. Darien maintained his careful observation, ensuring that no hidden threat could approach unnoticed. The kingdom's people, unaware of the dangers that had been quietly averted, continued their daily lives in peace. Markets bustled, fields grew crops, and children played along the castle walls. The royal horse guards, guided by Darien, remained ever vigilant, protecting the kingdom silently but effectively. Their work was not glamorous, but it was essential. As the sun set one evening, Darien stood on a ridge overlooking the kingdom. The sky was painted with hues of gold and violet. The forest beyond the castle was calm, the stables secure, and the horses grazing peacefully. Darien felt a quiet satisfaction. The kingdom had been tested, but it had endured. Courage, vigilance, and careful planning had preserved its safety. Darien knew that the story of the intruders would become a lesson for the guards, a reminder that even in times of peace, threats could emerge unexpectedly. But he also knew that with skill, preparation, and loyalty, the kingdom could face any challenge. The royal horse guards were ready, the stables were secure, and Officer Darien had proven that vigilance and courage were the kingdom's greatest allies. And so, as night fell and stars dotted the sky, the kingdom rested in peace, protected by the steadfast horse guards, guided by the wisdom and leadership of Officer Darien. The warning had been heeded, the threat had been confronted, and the kingdom had been safeguarded. The officers and their horses returned to their routines, proud of their courage, loyalty, and the knowledge that they had fulfilled their duty.